What you tend to find is that test of SDC is being pretty much done in most cases by the umbrella company, rightly or wrongly, but it's being done at the bottom of the chain, and it's then not finding its way back up to the client. So where you've maybe got the outcome of how that worker is being engaged, subject to an employment status test, is that route of kind of how they operate truly being passed back up the chain, and could that ultimately create a risk? And again, Andy, you mentioned it in your slides. No one is really confused when it comes to limited company contractors, because there are so many steps that you undertake to make sure that the client knows that it's a limited company, the client understands how they operate. As recruiters, you probably check tons of information about that person's business, etc. So there is no confusion around PSCs, but that kind of sole trader CIS world, it's really, really, covered in shades of grey. Like you ask a business, how many sole traders do you have? None. We don't engage with any. You ask them how many CIS workers they have, and they go, we've got 200, 300. Are they PSCs? No. Well, how are they engaged then? What are they? So I think there's a lot of probably not misinformation, but just misunderstanding about how those workers are actually engaged, and that is what will ultimately bring about the risk.
That's the problem, isn't it?
You spoke about, yeah.
If there's a bit of misunderstanding there, that's where you could potentially get into a difficulty that could bring JSL into play. But if there's not misunderstanding and everyone knows it, you can kind of like keep it at bay pretty easily.
Yeah.
But it's just getting that right.
What you find is that those workers, it's not just the employment status element which is sort of being miscommunicated. Sometimes the workers don't know what they are, and that's possibly because they're offered sort of mirroring benefits, insurances, personal accident cover, access to other things that the umbrella portion, which is employed by that company, reserved for those umbrella workers. And I think it's really that kind of mixing of the two sets of workers, the communication not going back to the client, that really causes some of this confusion to sit within different supply chains. And that challenge that you've got is reasonable to suppose. That is a very difficult phrase, and we kind of sat at Kingsbridge and said, well, what does that mean? And then you go on and it says, that one or more participants in the supply chain could assume that the worker is an employed worker. Well, who is a participant? Is that the hiring manager at the client? Is that HR sitting in a different department? Who is it? So I would stress from this session at least, really get those self-employed CIS workers in particular really, really clear, and the supply chain is really clear what they are and how they operate. And if they're self-employed, treat them as though they're self-employed. Don't cross-contaminate these different workers, because it will lead you to having this risk that Andy has spoken about.